Hey everyone, this is EDWAN and today I'm back in the studio with Luigi. Thank you so much for 20k subscribers and I think Luigi want to thank you all for this too. So I'm really glad to announce you that I just released my new progressive house track named Still Breathing that I made with Tyler Rose. You can check out the track by clicking here. In this video I will show you how I mixed this track. In progressive house you have to really make great mixing in order to have something powerful. There is often more layers than in tropical house, so it makes it complex to mix. So if you are ready, let's go! So I started this track by doing the first break. I put some chords and I chose a cool instrument. So that's the pad that I used. It's from Spire, it's great, and it has an LFO on the cutoff that is adding a really cool movement to the sound. So what I did on this one is add a little bit of flanger with the fruity flangus. I removed the low end with the Sonalaxis EQ, which is really cool. And at some parts I removed some frequencies which were a little bit too loud. Then I used the FabFilter Pro Q to remove a little bit more low end so that it doesn't clash with the bass. And the FabFilter Pro Q is really great because you can EQ separately the mid and the side signals. And you always want your main sound to be really present in the mid. So for the pads I removed a little bit of the mid in the high end so that the vocal and the lead sounds wouldn't clash too much with it. So that's what I did here. I just removed a lot of high end on the mid signal and also a bit on the side signal. Then I added the fruity stereo shaper in order to make the sound wider. The stereo shaper can be great on a pad, for example, or on a piano, but not on a bass or not necessarily on a lead sound. And finally I added some sidechain with LFO tool. I don't like gross beat. I fucking hate gross beat. I don't use gross beat for that because it requires you to draw your sidechain 4 times, no matter what. Why so complicated? So if you want to change your sidechain a little bit, you have to do it 4 times manually and it's really painful. If you have any idea on how to loop a gross beat on one kick, please let me know in the comments down below. Thank you.
Until next time, enjoy controlling your gross beat slots.
So I created an automation on the mix level of the LFO tool in order to vary the sidechain of the pad along the track. Meaning that in the beginning of the track, the mix level of the LFO tool is set to 0 and in the drop, the mix level is set to 100 and you have the full sidechain on this pad. I wanted to make this break a little bit more acoustic sounding, so I added a guitar sample from Vengeance Essential Club Sounds, the Latin guitar, so here it is. There is a lot of low end in this guitar, so I had to pitch it up. So the first thing I added on this guitar was an EQ to remove the low end and some mid-range frequencies and really keep the high frequencies so that it doesn't interfere too much with the pad. I also added some stereo shaper to make it more stereo sounding, some sidechain too, and a compressor with a really short attack. I also added a delay, the classic delay, which is free. You have to remove some of the high end and some of the low end so that it doesn't clash with the main instrument either. I will put a link in the description so that you can download it. And finally, I added the Valhalla Vintage reverb, which is really my favorite reverb. And on a reverb, you really have to remove some low end also. What the reverb does is really push the instrument more backwards. It can really help fill the track and give a more full feeling. And then when you add your vocal, your lead sound, it's really easier for the lead and the vocal to cut through the mix when there is not only dry sounds. I added another layer playing nearly the same chords as the main pad. It's the Nexus Pipe Organ 3. I also put some reverb on it and really cut the low end too and put a Haas effect, which is a stereo enhancer, and here it is. And in this first part, I bring the kick with a low pass filter, the Tom low pass filter, great for that, and it's free by Tom Gersick. In this first part, I already bring in the main melody, the drop melody, in order to get the listener used to the melody before the drop enters, and even before the build-up. This one is a Nexus sound. And I added 3 other layers. Interesting thing to note, I've put a low pass filter on the whole instrument's bus with a cutoff that is opening until the drop. It makes all the instruments less present and it gives really this progression feeling. And now let me show you how I mixed the voice. So Tyler Rose sent me this vocal. The original vocal was already great, but I wanted to enhance it a little bit with some tricks that I'm about to show you right now. So here is a dry vocal.
This crystal sea of yours touches me so gently. The icy touch sprays across my body.
So the first effect you want to add on the vocal is a de-esser. It is a kind of a compressor which will only compress the high frequencies. It will remove the s. So you have to adjust the threshold so that it acts only when there are some S in the vocal.
This crystal sea of yours touches me so gently.
Next, I added the Blue Tube's analog trackbox, which is a kind of analog emulator. So I added some distortion with this tube emulator, and I also used a built-in compressor with a low ratio, acting nearly all the time in order to make the volume of the vocal more consistent and to give more presence to the vocal.
This crystal sea of yours touches me so gently.
Next, I added another compressor with a higher ratio. My rule is always to add the compressor with the lowest ratio first and then add some other compressors with higher ratios, and the very last compressor that you might add would be a limiter, for example. So here I added a little bit more compression to make it even more present. Then I added a doubler. It's a kind of chorus made by waves. This adds some detuned voices at the left and at the right of the main vocal and making the sound a little bit richer.
This crystal sea of yours touches me so gently.
Then I added an equalizer in order to remove everything below 100 Hz. Because you don't need the low end from such a vocal. And I also cut some of the 200 range because it was a little bit too loud at some parts, and it fits better with the track like that.
This crystal sea of yours touches me so gently.
And after that, I added the Valhalla Vintage Reverb with 7 seconds of delay and cutting all the low end, and an equalizer right after this one to cut also the high end. And very important, I sidechained this reverb to the vocal with the fruity limiter. What this does is when the vocal is playing, this will duck a little bit down the reverb volume, and as soon as the vocal stops, the reverb gets again louder. So here it is, with and without the limiter. So without sidechain on the reverb.
This crystal sea of yours touches me so gently.
And with sidechain.
These rays of sun are beaming on my neck. I'm in its trance. The sky darkens and the clouds begin to fade.
So as you can hear, the vocal is clashing less with the reverb, since the reverb is ducking down when the vocal is playing. And the last plugin that I added on this vocal was a delay, the free classic delay with the ping pong mode activated, and also with a little bit of sidechain on it. So now let's switch to the part that you are waiting for, the drop. So the first element of the drop is of course the pad that we added already in the break. Here it is with a lot of sidechain. Next I added the sub, which is really low and adds a lot of energy to the drop and some groove. So I used the Ace VST. So here it is without any effects. The first thing I did here is remove all the high end and all the very low end. Next I added some compression, also with this free amazing compressor. On a sub bass you don't want to have many dynamics, so you really have to compress it a lot with a really low attack so that it doesn't peak when it's playing. And with a really high ratio, I even put it in limiter mode, which is infinite ratio, so nothing can go above a certain volume. So the volume has to be really consistent on the sub, really important. Next I added this awesome Max Bass plugin by Waves, which adds a little bit of higher frequencies, higher harmonics, so that you can still hear a little bit the sub even on your phone or on a smaller device. Next I added some sidechain. And last an EQ, just to remove the really low frequencies that might have been added with the Max Bass plugin. Next I added the little bass, how I call it. Here it is without any effects. Here it is with all the effects. So the first plugin I add here, it's a little secret. It's the Effector plugin. It really creates a great vocal-like sound with a Vox effect. Next I cut the very low frequencies, the very high frequencies, and some of the mid frequencies which I didn't like. The next one is an LFO tool, which is creating a cool gate effect. It's creating this stuttering effect, which is really great. As for the sub, you don't want to have too much dynamic range. You have to compress it a lot with a really short attack and a really high ratio. Next I added the Bluetooth analog track box to add more compression and some distortion. Then I added another effector on this channel because I wanted the bass to be a little bit different. And finally I added some sidechain and another EQ in order to remove high frequencies and some mid frequencies which were clashing with the rest of the track. Let's move on now to the lead sound. I use a high-pass filter to remove all the low end. I use a sidechain and the Blue Tube's analog track box to make the sound a bit warmer. I also added the Cashmere drop claps and some hi-hats on which I put a little sidechain, and I removed all the low ends and compressed them a lot. As you can see, nearly all the drums are going through the drum verb. When mixing the track, you have to make sure that the kick, drum and the bass are fitting well. You have to choose the right kick sample, that's really important. For the kick, I used this transient shaper to remove the very first part, the click of the kick, because I thought it was a bit too loud. So here it is, only the bass and the kick. So if you listen now, it fits pretty well together, so that's really important to check. Your kick bass has to sound good alone already. And of course, I added a lot of effects, like crash sounds, white noise. Another background layer that I added for the drop is a core from Nexus, and I think it's really cool. It adds some air to the track. Remove the low end, put a lot of stereo enhancement, remove some of the mid signal so that the lead sound has more room and it fits well with the rest of the instruments. That's it for the mixing. Now let's switch to the mastering. You'll see that it's not that complicated. So of course I'm not a professional mastering engineer, but what I do here makes sense and I can achieve the sound that I want, the volume that I want. So if you do what I'm doing here, you will achieve something similar. You have to keep in mind that the mastering will not solve your mixing issues. You have to be happy with your mixing before you start your mastering, otherwise you will never be happy with the final products. Here it is, without any effects on the mastering. So as you can hear, the mixed version is already powerful, so the mastering just adds some volume, reduces a bit the dynamic range to make it sound louder. It's really a way to add the final touch to the track. You shouldn't make anything too obvious on the mastering. So first I added this awesome compressor by Waves, Solid State Logic. It's a kind of emulation of a really expensive analog compressor. So here it is. So as you can see, it's just kissing the track. There is maybe 1 or 2 decibels of gain reduction. You shouldn't reduce more than 1 or 2 decibels on your master channel. Then I used the Isotope Ozone 4. I added a little bit of reverb on the whole track. Here it is. So it's really low, but it glues the whole track together. A multiband harmonic exciter. The harmonic exciter will create some harmonics, will create some frequencies out of the frequencies that are already in the track, and it will create a richer sound. So here it is without. Next I added some compression, multiband compression. Here it is without. it's really gluing the track together. And then a multiband stereo enhancer, which is especially useful to make the high frequencies a bit wider and to make sure that the low frequencies are really in mono, because you don't want your low frequencies to be in stereo because it's useless. Then I added a bit more compression. Then I added another harmonic exciter by waves. Here is the difference without and with. Without and with. And after this, you want to add a limiter. Here I added the Waves L2 Ultra Maximizer. The main thing you want to pay attention to is that the attenuation has to be around 3 or 4 decibels at maximum. You don't want to have more, otherwise you will start hearing some distortion and the sound will not be good at all. Here it is. And if I add too much compression, here is how it sounds. It really adds some distortion, and you don't want this in your track. Without the final limiter. And here it is with the final limiter. It really adds the final volume that you want. And I use the TT Dynamic Range Meter, which is a free plugin. It allows you to see the dynamic range of your track and if it peaks above 0 and the average volume. So for your final mastered track, usually you want to have around 7 decibels of dynamic range and about the same in RMS. So let's see here. A big thanks to Momentum Records for this release. You can check out their YouTube channel in the description. They publish a lot of great tracks. So I hope you enjoyed this explanation on how I mixed and mastered my track Still Breathing, which is out right now. You can listen and download the full track for free right here. If you have more questions, don't hesitate to ask them in the comments down below. Don't forget to pray to FL Studio God, and see you soon! And now you can watch this video, I'm sure you will like it. Click here. Luigi, I love you so. Luigi, I love you so.